It's terrible that after 50 years, it is behind closed doors.
No one expected the silence inside the royal vault to become louder than any palace announcement. Within minutes, one order transformed decades of quiet tradition into an unforgettable confrontation. King Charles personally reclaimed the Queen Mother's legendary pearls set from secure storage, and in the same breath, Queen Camilla was denied access to the vault altogether. It was not merely about priceless jewels, it became a declaration of trust, authority, and the invisible lines that now divided the royal family. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles understood that the pearls carried a meaning no valuation could capture. The Queen Mother's historic set had passed through private family occasions, formal duties, and generations of carefully guarded memory. These were not simply expensive objects. They represented continuity, personal loyalty, and a link to a woman whose influence had shaped the monarchy long after her death. The royal vault carried the same emotional weight. It was a secure collection where private heirlooms were preserved under strict family authority, not a public treasury or ordinary storage room. Access reflected trust. Custody reflected responsibility. And once permission was withdrawn, the message reached far beyond jewelry. Camilla arrived expecting routine entry. She had been told that a review of the collection was underway, but nothing suggested she would be excluded. Then the security officer remained in front of the restricted entrance and quietly informed her that authorization had changed. The Queen asked whether there had been a mistake. He checked the written order again and gave the same answer. The door would not open for her. Charles stood inside supervising the transfer himself. The king instructed staff to remove the pearl set from its case, record every piece, and place the collection under his personal custody. A custody order was the formal instruction identifying who could legally control and safeguard a royal heirloom. He delegated nothing, and that alone unsettled the people watching. Senior aides exchanged uneasy glances as they realized how few had known. Only selected security officers, one collection registrar, and a small circle of trusted relatives had been warned before the transfer began. Camilla had not been among them. Her exclusion was not an oversight. It had been built into the plan. The Queen remained composed, but the restraint in her voice exposed the hurt beneath it. She asked whether Charles intended to speak with her personally. No one answered immediately. That silence revealed the true danger. Someone inside the palace had known this order was coming and had helped prepare every detail before Camilla arrived. But while the vault doors had closed on one queen, another story was unfolding behind palace walls, one built entirely around the people standing on opposite sides of that decision. Royal history often remembers crowns and ceremonies, yet the deepest battles are fought in quiet rooms where families struggle to separate love from duty. As the pearl set disappeared from the vault, every member of the household understood this was becoming intensely personal. The decision forced loyalties into the open, exposing emotions that had remained hidden beneath years of carefully controlled royal composure. Charles had carried the Queen Mother's influence throughout his life. Her jewelry was never simply part of a collection to him. It represented family memory, emotional protection, and a generation that had shaped his understanding of monarchy. The pearl set mattered because it connected the king to someone whose approval had once given him certainty when private life became difficult. Camilla had expected the household to view her differently. As the reigning queen, she believed she would continue serving as a trusted custodian of senior collections, meaning a person permitted to safeguard, wear, and help manage important family heirlooms. Her exclusion, therefore, felt larger than one denied request. It suggested that her title had not brought the private confidence she thought had finally been secured. The king struggled with that truth in silence. Protecting the pearls meant defending a family legacy he feared could be weakened by personal claims, but protecting his marriage required him to explain why his wife had been shut out. Charles knew every delay deepened the wound, yet speaking too soon could reveal the larger concern behind his order. William noticed Camilla's disappointment before she said anything. The prince saw how carefully she controlled her voice and how quickly she withdrew from the vault corridor. He chose not to interfere. The future king understood that any defense of either side would turn a private decision into another contest over loyalty, and he believed Charles had to carry the burden himself. Anne appeared far calmer than everyone else. She asked no questions, challenged no instruction, and showed none of the surprise moving through the household. Her restraint unsettled senior advisors because it suggested prior knowledge. The Princess Royal understood something others did not, and the people closest to the king began wondering whether the reclaimed pearls were only the first part of a broader plan. Trusted officials quietly reviewed access lists, custody records, and previous collection requests. Their concern grew. If Charles was redrawing the limits around one heirloom, other family treasures might soon be placed under the same restrictions. The answer did not begin at the vault. It began months earlier, during a meeting so ordinary that nearly everyone forgot it had happened. To understand why the vault doors finally closed, everyone had to return to one overlooked moment that quietly changed the future. History rarely changes during grand ceremonies. Sometimes everything begins inside a private room where only a few voices are heard. Long before the pearl collection became the center of royal attention, one forgotten conversation planted the seed of distrust. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Later, everyone would recognize it as the exact moment the entire course of events quietly shifted forever. Charles entered the Windsor Review expecting a routine discussion. Senior family members and collection advisors had gathered to examine how historically important heirlooms should be protected, loaned, and recorded for future generations. A stewardship review was a private assessment of who could access valuable family objects and who carried responsibility for preserving them. The concern had grown because informal customs were no longer considered strong enough to protect collections shaped by personal memories, changing households, and competing expectations. Anne listened as advisors argued for tighter oversight. Some believed access should remain flexible, allowing senior royals to request pieces through trusted staff. Others wanted written approval for every transfer, fearing that private arrangements could slowly weaken accountability. The Princess Royal understood why Charles looked unsettled. He was not deciding who could wear jewelry for one evening. He was deciding whether affection and rank could still operate without firm limits. Camilla then made the request that changed the meeting. She asked for expanded authority over access scheduling for selected family heirlooms, including the power to approve which pieces could leave secure storage and when they would return. Her proposal did not claim ownership, but it would place the Queen at the center of future decisions. She presented it as practical continuity. Charles heard something more dangerous, a shift from trusted participation toward permanent control. The king paused before answering. He studied the papers, asked one advisor to repeat the proposed terms, and then ended the discussion without granting approval. Charles left the room visibly disturbed, offering no explanation to his wife or the officials waiting for direction. His silence created uncertainty, because no one knew whether he intended to reconsider the request or had already rejected it in his mind. Anne watched her brother go, but said nothing. She recognized the burden in his hesitation and understood that confronting Camilla immediately would force him to choose before he was ready. Yet the Queen also noticed Anne's restraint, and that quiet exchange deepened the suspicion between them. Palace staff later described the unfinished meeting in a documented internal account as the true beginning of the conflict. Nothing had been signed, but trust had shifted. Every later access review, custody question, and private instruction carried the weight of that unanswered request. The silence that began inside that private meeting would soon be broken by words neither side could ever take back. No speeches, no photographers, no cheering crowds, just two people facing each other inside a palace corridor where every pause carried more weight than every word spoken. The confrontation over the Queen Mother's pearls became less about jewels and more about trust, legacy, and the painful realization that some decisions cannot satisfy everyone. Charles had already made the choice before Camilla approached him. The pearl set belonged to the family's private collection, which meant the reigning monarch could determine who held custody without seeking public approval or parliamentary permission. Private custody was the responsibility to control, protect, and authorize access to an heirloom owned by the family rather than the state. That distinction gave the king authority, but it did not make the emotional cost any easier to bear. The restricted vault area had fallen into an unnatural silence. Security officers remained at their posts, senior aides kept their distance, and no one attempted to interrupt. Camilla understood that the people nearby had already received instructions. The queen was not entering a discussion that might change the outcome. She was arriving to hear a decision that had been completed without her. Charles spoke calmly. He told his wife that the pearl collection would remain under his direct custody and that no new access would be granted until he completed a wider review of the family heirlooms. The monarch did not accuse her of misconduct. He did not raise his voice, yet the restraint made the message feel even colder because it left no opening for negotiation. Camilla asked whether he truly believed she could not be trusted with the set. She struggled to keep disappointment from breaking through her composure, but the question exposed the wound beneath her anger. The queen had spent years proving her loyalty beside him. Now one locked door seemed to erase every duty she had performed and every sacrifice she believed the family had finally recognized. Charles answered that trust was not the only issue. The collection carried obligations that had become too tangled with private expectations, and he would no longer allow uncertainty to govern its future. The king understood that his explanation would not comfort her, but he refused to soften the finality of the order. Then Charles placed the vault authorization card on the table. It was the coded access credential, allowing approved entry into the restricted collection. He removed his hand and ended the conversation. The witnesses nearby recognized that simple gesture as the true emotional climax. Camilla looked at the card, then at her husband, and understood there would be no reversal. The confrontation ended quickly, but the real force behind the decision had only begun to reveal itself. Power inside a monarchy is rarely measured by raised voices. Instead, it appears in quiet signatures, carefully chosen responsibilities, and the willingness to carry decisions that may wound those closest to you. As questions spread throughout the palace, attention shifted from emotion toward something even stronger, the burden of royal authority itself. Charles understood that custody did not mean possession. Stewardship was the duty to protect an heirloom for the family and future generations, while personal ownership meant the freedom to treat it as private property. The distinction mattered because the Queen Mother's pearls were not simply ornaments. They carried institutional continuity, linking one royal era to the next, and reminding every custodian that history could be worn, but never truly owned. The king sat alone after the confrontation, studying old photographs of the Queen Mother before reviewing the transfer record one final time. Her image brought comfort, but it also sharpened the burden. She had represented certainty, tradition, and emotional security throughout much of his life. Locking the pearls away again felt like protecting her legacy, yet Charles knew the same act had deeply wounded Camilla. Anne entered without ceremony and found her brother still holding the custody papers. The Princess Royal did not praise the decision or dismiss the pain it had caused. She told him that preserving history sometimes required choices no one would thank him for making. Charles admitted that duty felt easier when the consequences were abstract. This time, the hurt had a name, a marriage, and a closed door standing between them. Senior advisors soon recognized that the order reached far beyond one collection. Royal custodianship was the system of safeguarding historically important possessions for continued family and institutional use. By placing the pearls under direct control, the monarch had reaffirmed that access depended on responsibility, not title alone. That principle threatened assumptions that had shaped palace life for years. Officials began reviewing old permissions before midnight. Informal access arrangements were suspended, standing requests were cancelled, and household staff were told that future loans would require fresh authorization. No announcement accompanied the changes, yet behind closed doors, long-standing privileges disappeared one by one. Camilla learned of the wider review through a documented message sent to her private office. The Queen realized that her exclusion had not been an isolated rebuke. Charles was redrawing the entire structure around the family's heirlooms. Anne understood the same truth, and warned her brother that secrecy would not contain the consequences for long. By sunrise, what had begun as a private family decision had already become impossible to contain. Some moments do not arrive with dramatic announcements. They arrive when someone walks into an empty room, expecting life to continue as before, and discovers everything has quietly changed. That realization settled over the palace as every member of the household adjusted to a reality no longer defined by expectation, but by finality. Charles's order changed palace routines almost immediately. Staff who had once handled heirloom requests through informal messages were now required to follow written approval procedures. Restricted heirlooms were family treasures placed under special protection, meaning access depended on direct authorization rather than rank or personal custom. Every transfer had to be recorded, every request reviewed, and every return confirmed. The new system protected the collection, but it also exposed how much royal life had previously relied on trust that was never written down. Camilla returned to her private sitting room and removed her gloves without speaking. The Queen had entered the vault corridor, expecting ordinary access, and left, knowing the rules had been changed around her. She placed the gloves aside, with careful control, yet the silence revealed what her composure could not. The denial felt less like procedure, and more like a judgment on whether she truly belonged inside the family's most protected memories. William noticed her isolation before anyone else approached. The prince paused outside the room, uncertain whether kindness would comfort her or make the humiliation sharper. He understood why Charles had protected the pearls, but he also recognized the cost of excluding his wife without warning. After a long hesitation, he walked away respectfully, deciding that this pain belonged first to Camilla and the king. The distance spread quickly. Family members lowered their voices when the collection was mentioned. Staff avoided unnecessary questions. Anne became even more careful around her brother, while Charles buried himself in custody records and future safeguards. The household no longer felt divided by one piece of jewelry. It felt divided by what the decision suggested about trust. Senior royals began reconsidering their own positions. Some quietly reviewed which heirlooms they had assumed would remain available to them. Others asked whether duty alone still guaranteed access. The king's action had created a new reality. Titles could open ceremonial doors, but they could not automatically unlock private family history. Camilla finally asked for no explanation through aides. Instead, she sent Charles a short handwritten message requesting a conversation without advisors, documents, or security officials present. The monarch read it twice before agreeing. Away from advisors and officials, two members of the family finally spoke with complete honesty. Behind every public decision lies one private conversation that never appears in official records. Free from ceremony and expectation, two members of the royal family finally spoke openly about legacy, responsibility, and the cost of carrying history. Their discussion became the emotional turning point that transformed conflict into understanding, even if complete agreement remained impossible. Charles asked for privacy before the palace could close around him again. He dismissed officials, set aside the custody papers, and met Anne without advisors or prepared language. The king needed more than legal reassurance. He needed someone who understood why protecting the pearls had felt both necessary and deeply cruel. A private royal collection carried history through generations, but the people safeguarding it still had to live with the pain their choices created. Anne understood that burden better than most. The Princess Royal had spent years treating family history as a responsibility rather than a privilege. She knew that preserving heirlooms required discipline, yet she also knew every object carried memories of people who had loved, disappointed, and wounded one another. Protecting the past was never emotionally neutral. Charles finally admitted what he had avoided saying. Denying Camilla access had hurt him personally. He believed the order was right, but watching his wife absorb the decision in silence made the victory feel hollow. The monarch had protected the Queen Mother's pearls, yet he feared he had damaged the marriage standing in front of him. Anne did not dismiss that fear. She told her brother that temporary pain and permanent responsibility could not be treated as the same thing. Camilla's hurt deserved compassion, but compassion could not mean surrendering every boundary. The Queen's disappointment might soften with time. A careless decision involving the collection could shape the family for generations. The King asked whether relationships could survive such choices. Anne answered honestly, some might never return to what they had been. Trust, once altered, did not automatically rebuild because duty had been fulfilled. But she reminded Charles that avoiding a necessary decision would not have protected anyone. It would only have delayed the conflict until the cost became greater. Charles accepted the possibility that complete repair might never come. The admission steadied him. His confidence did not return as pride, but as clarity. He would explain the decision without cruelty, protect the collection without turning Camilla into an enemy, and accept responsibility for the consequences. Anne left him with one warning. Inside the palace, the family might still choose restraint. Outside it, restraint would be mistaken for secrecy, and secrecy would invite judgment. As the family searched for peace, the world prepared to judge every decision they had made. By morning, what had begun inside secure palace walls belonged to the entire nation. Every headline, photograph, and television discussion reflected a different interpretation of the king's remarkable decision. Yet one unforgettable public image captured the emotional mood more powerfully than thousands of written words ever could. National media turned immediately toward the meaning behind the reclaimed pearl set. Broadcasters described the decision as a test of heritage, authority, and family unity. Royal commentators explained that the pearls were not simply valuable jewelry, but private heirlooms connected to the Queen Mother and the continuity of the monarchy. That distinction mattered because public opinion would depend on whether people saw Charles's action as protection or punishment. Camilla faced that judgment during a scheduled appearance later that morning. The Queen maintained her composure, greeted those waiting for her, and completed every duty expected of her. Yet the restraint in her voice revealed the emotional strain beneath the surface. She had not lost a title or an official role, but the denial had exposed a private limit that the public could now see. Charles continued his own engagements with equal control. The king refused to comment beyond the palace statement, yet his determination suggested that the order would stand. He understood that any sign of uncertainty might turn the custody decision into a wider crisis, so he carried on while the debate grew around him. The defining public moment arrived on the front pages. One major newspaper printed the headline, "The Pearls Returned to the King," above a large photograph of the Buckingham Palace gates. Buckingham Palace was the monarch's official London headquarters, making those gates a powerful symbol of royal authority and public scrutiny. Outside them, a crowd gathered quietly, discussing the decision and applauding what many described as the preservation of royal heritage. The image spread rapidly. Some still believed Camilla had been treated with unnecessary coldness. Others argued that Charles had drawn a necessary boundary between being queen and controlling every object connected to the women who came before her. As the day continued, public opinion began shifting. The pearls were increasingly viewed not as personal possessions to be claimed, but as symbols of continuity entrusted temporarily to those responsible for protecting them. William watched the coverage without celebrating, while Anne refused to describe the outcome as a victory. Both understood that support for the decision did not erase the pain it had caused. The monarchy had preserved the heirloom, but it had also exposed a wound within the family. Only one question remained, not what happened, but what it ultimately meant. When the headlines faded, history was left to deliver its final judgment. Every monarchy is ultimately remembered not for the treasures it owns, but for the choices it makes when those treasures become symbols of identity itself. The Queen Mother's pearls survived another chapter, yet their greatest value was never measured in gemstones. They became the lasting reminder that legacy demands sacrifice, even from those closest to the throne. Charles understood that the pearl set carried more than family sentiment. Royal heirlooms preserved the memory of earlier generations, linking private relationships to the public story of the crown. Stewardship meant protecting those objects for the future, rather than treating them as personal rewards. By reclaiming direct custody, the king had placed responsibility above preference. But the decision had also forced him to accept that duty could wound the very people he wanted to protect. The secured collection remained quiet when Charles returned one final time. He reviewed the custody record, confirmed that every pearl had been properly documented, and placed his hand gently against the display case before stepping away without speaking. The monarch had spent days defending the order with calm authority. Yet in that private moment, he allowed himself to feel its cost. The Queen Mother's legacy was safe, but his marriage had been changed by the manner in which he preserved it. Camilla reached her own conclusion without another protest. The Queen accepted that the pearls would remain outside her control, and that access to historically sensitive heirlooms would no longer follow title alone. Her acceptance did not erase the humiliation of the locked vault, or the pain of discovering that Charles had acted without warning her. She understood that the wound would remain part of their shared history. Still, she chose dignity over another confrontation, refusing to let disappointment become open rebellion against her husband's responsibility. Anne recognized that the decision had also created new obligations for everyone around the king. The Princess Royal supported stricter safeguards, but she warned Charles in a private recorded conversation that clear authority must always be matched by honest communication. William reached the same judgment. The prince believed the family could survive firm boundaries, but not repeated silences that allowed personal hurt to grow beneath official calm. The pearl collection gradually emerged as a symbol of continuity rather than division. Access procedures became clearer, responsibilities were recorded, and family members stopped treating private assumptions as permanent rights. Relationships did not return to their earlier shape. They settled into a new balance, less comfortable perhaps, but far more honest. The final verdict was unmistakable. Charles preserved the Queen Mother's legacy, redefined the limits of trust within the royal family, and proved that the crown's greatest responsibility was protecting history even when the personal price became profound. Camilla retained her dignity, Anne accepted the burden of supporting difficult boundaries, and William saw a monarchy choosing permanence over convenience. When the vault doors closed again, they did not close in secrecy or fear. They closed with quiet certainty. The pearls remained protected, the conflict reached its end, and the monarchy emerged with a stronger understanding of what duty truly demanded. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.